So I open it up to questions and answers. And thank you all for coming.
I know there's some kids with a lot of questions. Big ones, I mean.
So the mitochondrial study on the female DNA, where can we look into that? Where can we see that? Like online somewhere, or is there a book?
Oh my, that's I'm trying to build a website to have some of this.
Okay.
So I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm going to try to put it on there. There is a challenge to be able to translate all this technical stuff that my part-time research, I'm just talking to biologists and to scientists all day. I'm not, I only reach out to the general audience maybe like once every 7 years. And but I've felt led of the Lord because people have asked me, can you make it a little more accessible? So I will be trying to put it on the website. There are 2 resources. Thank you for asking. In the meantime, go to creationscience.com. It's Walter Brown's website, creationscience.com. It'll answer lots of things about Noah's flood. Walter Brown is an Army Ranger, so I sort of like him because he's an Army Ranger. And he was an MIT grad. He got his PhD in 2 years. Brilliant man. He taught at the Air Force Academy. And after he retired, his full-time job is to study creation science, and his website's creationscience.com. So the navigation through his website's a little tough, but it's great information. Yes, Mark.
You kind of talked about this a little bit, but the suppression of creation theory in scientific journals and scientific publications, that's still ongoing. People are finding it difficult to get published and be taken seriously if they don't toe the line. Do you see any trends in your work that's breaking down intellectually?
I would say it's polarizing. You're getting both sides entrenched, and it's a little hard for me because I'm seeing the persecutions getting worse. It's just like it used to be okay to say marriage is between a man and a woman. That seemed like 20 years ago in our culture you wouldn't be labeled all these awful names just because if you spoke in those terms. And prior to that, the worst thing you could possibly do is be a creation researcher. Now, kind of the reason that along those lines, the reason you heard in some of the intro about my biographical data, I got in the intelligent design movement here at George Mason University, just up the road. And my very first day that I organized the club, a professor of biology attended there by the name of Carolyn Crocker. And Carolyn Crocker came to accept intelligent design. And she attended the club. A reporter from Nature was there. And we knew that our stories were going to be reported internationally at that point. After that article was released, 3 weeks afterwards, she called me. She said, I've been dismissed from the university. They go after you. There was a double PhD by the name of Richard von Sternberg. In fact, forgive me if I don't know the name. There's like a special counsel or some sort of special investigative committee that was commissioned by Congress. He was an evolutionary biologist. He had 2 PhDs, and he began to have doubts. Well, he got dismissed. He got tossed from the NIH, and it caused a congressional investigation. But at the time, George W. Bush was not that popular. They didn't have the political willpower to really defend him, and so he's blacklisted to this day. So it's difficult if you're standing for the truth. You may not, the funny thing is some of these people are not even Christians, but they know that they're just being fed lies. They're just tired of it. And when they speak up even a little bit to say this doesn't work, because billions of dollars are riding on these, reputations are riding on this, and also the cultural imperative. It's like people just do not want to, be subservient to the Christian God. I mean, I can sense it. And so the climate's really hostile. And I remember when I talked to one of my friends in the intelligent design movement. I said, "This is really kind of tough." He said, "Well, you can expect it. You can expect, the Lord told you you're going to be persecuted. Now you're in for it." And it's not so bad being in engineering, but in other fields, it's going to be hard. So it's bad, and that's why I'm so grateful you all came here today, because the government's not going to protect our churches. They're part of attacking our churches at this point with perpetuating these falsehoods. Now, the nice thing is, all we have to do is, you just look through the literature, and these evolutionary biologists say, well, we can't explain this, and then these planetary researchers say, well, we can't explain this phenomenon. I became a creationist partly because I was reading what they're, I left the Christian faith for a while, and I hung out with the atheists, and when I hung out and heard their answers, I became a Christian again, creationist. Yes?
This is a slight change in subject, but we as Christians know that all creation speaks to the glory and majesty of God. And you had mentioned during your first talk about Charles Darwin and how he actually utilized the natural creation to kind of support his theories of natural selection and the origin of species. But fittingly, the peacock is on display behind you currently. And that was maybe his one fault in defending his theories. I asked the question, how did he speak to his lapse of understanding in accordance with Exhibit A behind you, the peacock? And can you maybe speak to a rumor that I once heard about Darwin, that maybe he actually found God before his death and professed to be a Christian? Yeah.
Okay, I'll answer the second question first and the first question second. Most historians now conclude that he did not repent. I'm not in the place of God to judge what really happened, but his wife was a Christian, and it's widely believed that she tried to spin things to honor her husband. That's really kind of a noble thing to do, but sometimes she loved the man, and I think that colored the way she perceived him and spoke about him. So historians that are in the know say that he didn't convert. Now, regarding the peacock's tail, because his first theory didn't work to explain it, he came up with another theory called sexual selection, and that also fails because it's like, well, for the reasons I pointed out, where's the efficient, creatures like that, nature should, because they're so inefficient, like they're really great. You're like, it's like an aircraft with a huge radar signature. All right, he's just asking for it. He's like, hey, here I am. I'm your next meal to the other predators. And Darwin's like, well, nature should just kind of exterminate things like that. And so his theory of sexual selection, it's not even popular among some evolutionary biologists today. And one thing I should note, I say, well, look at the evidence. What species are going extinct very quickly? Numbers, large numbers. It's birds, complex birds. So the more complex the creature, the more likely it is that it's going to die. And that's why, I'm all for conservation and ecology and preserving God's creation, but there's a certain inevitability of complex creatures dying. One thing that Darwin didn't realize, his theory of natural selection means you're going to eliminate species. He wrote Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for existence. He wrote that, and he said, well, this is how species are made, but really, for every one that you destroy thousands. And I've asked evolutionary biologists, okay, I said, how about in the present day, tell me how many species are being made? And they said, well, we don't really have a number. Okay, how many species are being destroyed? Thousands every year. And I said, well, shouldn't Darwin retitle his book, The Elimination of Species by Natural Selection? The evidence, it just does not square with the physical evidence. Any other questions? I really thank you all for staying. I'm going to be here. Oh, yes, by all means.
Genetics and that type of thing. We're finding out more and more about genetics and the complexity of things. Is that opening up the doors to this whole idea of natural selection and species with, fish turning into a bird or something of that nature, the impossibility of it?
No, thank God. I mean, God's on our side. He knew that as we discovered these things, people are just going to have less and less of an excuse. I alluded a little bit to it where I talked about the double circulation. A fish has like a single circulation system, just kind of very simple system of pumping blood, kind of just in a single loop. Now, we're wired more complexly. That's not really a word, sorry. We're wired in a more complex way. The problem with evolving from a single circulation heart to a double circulation heart, what if you get some of the wires wrong? The creature's dead, you don't really have half a heart and expect to live. With the DNA, I probably know the question you have in mind. Similarity. We are similar, like we are very similar to chimpanzees. Now, when I was talking to a family member, I said, we're created by God. We didn't evolve from ape-like creatures. She agreed. And then I mentioned a politician she really didn't like, and she said, I'm sure now he came from a monkey. But anyway, raising the issue of our similarity. We are very similar to chimpanzees. Our hearts, our organs, lungs, somewhat of our hands, not the thumbs, but our fingers, our toes, the structure, circulatory system, so many things. And it's like, well, maybe we're related. We are related. So why would God do that, if he's trying to prove that we're specially made in his sight? And I realized, it would actually be very difficult to do scientific research if some of the creatures weren't very close to us. I mean, if we have to do certain kinds of medical investigations or pharmaceutical investigations, you'd have to be chopping up humans and examining their parts. And it's like, I thank God it's not me. But really, this is just a theory. He made us similar enough that we can actually discover ourselves. When we discover how some things function, like we study yeast to understand how the human DNA works, because it's a lot easier. God's actually given us the tools. So the issue of our similarity to chimps is a big sticking point. It's like we just look too similar. Now, some of the work that I've been tasked to recently is to look at the chimpanzee genome. Evolutionists have said we are 98% similar in DNA, and that's actually not true. If we look at the numbers, and we're going through all the genomic databases, the number's more like 89%. That's enough of a difference to say we don't have a common ancestor, and there's going to be more that will say, yeah, we are similar, but there's no way we could be physically related. There are barriers there. I mean, like, what I really do is I say, okay, yeah, some of our DNA is similar to the fish, some of it's even similar to plants and bacteria, but then, I confront the evolutionists. I say, okay, so you say we all descended from one common ancestor because of the DNA. So I said, well, what does that mean? Does that mean a bacteria, a giraffe, a fish, and a bird, and a human being, and a tree? They all have the same grandpa? Why don't you describe him? And then they get kind of stuck. They say, well, it was a prokaryotic, prokaryotic life form, and that's when I pounce on them. That's when I start saying, okay, where did those spliceosomal introns come from? Huh? How about those histones and nucleosomes and those histone acetyltransferases and deacetylases? I mean, I just pounce on them and they're like, okay, don't want to talk to you anymore. So there is similarity, but that's, as I was saying, that's how God does conceal. He doesn't make it easy. You have to look a little deeper. One thing I tell the evolutionists, I said, okay, you're arguing for similarity. So that means fish are fish, right? Mammals are mammals, birds are birds, trees are trees. I said, just dumb old me, I'd probably say, it seems to me intuition says a fish is going to give birth to another fish. That'll be true 100 years from now. That'll be true 1,000 years from now. I mean, what evidence? You know what? The only evidence they have a fish evolved into a bird, a giraffe, and all the other creatures that are on the land. The only place where that evidence is, it's in their imagination. What they do is they take these fossils that aren't really all, they're not that informative. They're just skeletons. You have these approximate shapes. I can make a toy car, and it has about the shape of a real car. Same with an airplane. I can make a toy airplane, it has about the shape of a real airplane. But what matters is all the inside details. It's the soft tissue where all the action is. And when you start confronting them, and one way that I reach out to the biology students and the science students at schools, I actually don't give them talks like this. I just give them questions. I said, okay, after you've gotten an A and you're at no risk of being denied your diploma for speaking heresies against Charles Darwin, ask these questions. And I give them those questions. You've heard me articulate some of those very technical questions. All of them come back and said, the professor had no answer. Where's like the heart is kind of like one of my favorites. It's actually one of the weaker ones. I say, you're taking physiology, okay, and your professor will tell you that we evolved from the fish. Single circulation heart evolved into a double circulation heart with 3 chambers and then became 4 chambers. I said, okay, ask your professor if you're in his good graces. Be polite. Don't be confrontational. Just ask. And one girl was very astute. She was not going to be offensive. She went to the professor and said, okay, can you describe what a heart is that's kind of transitional? Transitional meaning if you're going from 1 chamber, you're going to go to 2. I mean, do you have a 1.5 chambered heart, So she is very smart. She started asking, tell me what's in between to go from 1 to 2, tell me with a heart that is fractional. And the physiology professor said, actually, I don't know. You have to ask the evolutionary. That's evolutionary biologist. That's not my department. And he asked, well, why are you asking all this? And she said, well, I do believe she's being truthful. She said, I just want to make sure, what answer I have to give if you put it on an exam. He said, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you what the transitional is. She came back a week later. Her heart, her face is beaming. She said, you were right. There was no transitional. So that's how I sort of deal with that for the college students in particular. Yes?
When you talk about the difference, you talked about the apes, and then you talked about the heart. But as I understand it, we use pig hearts for replacements for our own human heart pieces, anyhow. So which is closer in the, DNA or however, whatever the argument is that we're closer to the apes. But why don't we use ape parts in human parts rather than pig parts that we use currently?
It's a very insightful question, actually. It turns out we share some similarities with odd creatures like spiders that we don't share with chimpanzees. And that actually causes a problem for evolutionists trying to construct an evolutionary tree. God kind of put these little, you'll see them, they'll say, well, we can't resolve this phylogeny, which means we can't resolve the evolutionary relationship. We can't explain how that part that looks so much like a human being is shared between like we have some genes that we share with chickens that we don't share with chimpanzees. And, they're like, how'd that happen? And so that explains a little bit of it. And I'll even say this. God put it there to kind of frustrate the evolutionists. He has such a sense of humor. It's just funny to see these, they come out and say, evolution's fact, fact, fact. And then behind the doors you're saying, we can't solve this problem. And that's one of the evidences. Yes?
One more question. Hopefully it'll be a brief answer, so I can get on the way here. But I wanted to speak to carbon dating briefly. I have a lot of friends who study science, and that's kind of always the fallback. It's the most current studies that mention the carbon dating of certain organisms. I'm thinking of the thousands of bones that were found in South Africa recently by some cave researchers and miners. In any case, they do have soft tissue on them, and in the process of carbon dating these samples, In any case, before you began your talk, we were kind of speaking to the age of the Earth. And when I was in high school, some 12 years ago, the age of the Earth was 3.4 billion years old. Today, I'm a high school teacher, and we're telling our students that the age of the Earth is somewhere around, I think, 4.6 billion years old. In any case, how do you kind of refute a scientist when they bring up carbon dating? Because to me, in my ignorance, obviously it seems like, depending on who's funding the study, it could be more or less accurate depending on the agenda. If we find that, we find a shell that's supposedly Mary used to, dab the blood on Jesus' face, and it's funded by scientific researchers who claim to be Christian, and all of a sudden we find that it's some thousands of years old. But these bones that are located in South Africa, I'm assuming are going to be carbon dated to be billions or millions of years old. So kind of how do you use that to your advantage as a Christian to refute someone that kind of their sole basis of their argument falls upon the carbon dating phenomenon?
Well, God has provided us the means. Our numbers are so few in creation science, and God has to fight. Maybe the illustration I'll give, somebody like the Battle of Gideon, he had 300 people. God wanted to reduce the number small. He said, I'm going to make this army so small so no one will boast. I don't think God wants the creation science movement to succeed by people saying, well, it's our knowledge and our smarts that we persuaded everyone. He's taking the people that are really not that qualified in the world's view. In fact, 1 Corinthians sort of explains that. Not many wise, but not many noble by the world's standards. He's taking the base things of the world, the things that are despised, to nullify the things that are. And if you look at the Battle of Gideon, when they blew the trumpets, the opposing army just killed each other. So the way that I respond to that is I take data from other evolutionists and other people that are not creationists, because they publish on this. You just have to find it, and thank God for the internet. Thank God for Bill Gates, the hero of us all nerds. But because of this, we can find the data now. We weren't 20 years ago. We would not be able to wage this fight. But now all I have to do is just pull out, and I say, hey, we have this seashell here that has traces of carbon. Now, what we know is carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. So after 100,000 years, there should not be very, very much of a trace. So if we have, even though we might not have the most exact calibration, we know that it's just like if you found someone who recently died, if their body's still warm and it's kind of a cold environment, you may not be able to exactly say when they died, but it was there was some relative recency. In the same way with carbon dating, we may not be able to get the exact number, but we know it's not millions of years. We know it's not millions of years. They may date it to 50,000. That's kind of the standard date. They find these carbon, these like the fossil carbon, 50,000 years old, and just flood of studies. In fact, it's gotten to be an embarrassment. They no longer will carbon date things that they think are millions of years old. They'll say, well, carbon dating doesn't work for that because it's millions of years old. And of course they're saying it's not effective because they're assuming it's millions of years old. They're not really looking at the physical evidence. They'll say it's contamination. They'll have to go through some differential equations to show that it can't possibly be contamination. And they say, well, it's other radiation sources. You have some creationists who are nuclear chemists, and they'll go through all the analysis, and it actually confirms what the mainstream has said, because one mainstream scientist will say, well, definitely can't be contamination, so it has to be something else. And another mainstream scientist will say, well, definitely couldn't be other radiation sources. And they don't realize they're just they're mutually destroying each other's arguments. Now, where this data is, creationscience.com, you'll find it's a good resource. There are others like Creation Ministries International. Those are my favorites. By the way, I'm a regular attender at OBC. So if questions like this come up, I'm actually better at, rather than giving talks, because it takes a lot out of me. I'm better at kind of one-on-one. I love it when someone says, hey, can we have coffee at talk? like I said, my breakfasts are free. You know, if you, I'm not like Richard Dawkins. You can invite me to your home or something, or you can come to mine. So I think I really appreciate you all being here. So maybe that's my way of saying this isn't goodbye. I really hope you will look me up if you have someone you need to talk to, you want to introduce me. I will caution one thing. If people have a hardened heart, they're not, no matter what arguments I give them, they're not going to listen. Lazarus rose from the dead, and the Pharisees just wanted to kill Lazarus and Jesus after that. And that's the reaction I get. So if you have an atheistic friend you want me to argue with, it's like, well, and he's really hostile, it's like, can you find someone else, someone more pleasant? I don't mind. If you Google my name, you'll just see all sorts of forward letters associated with me. I'm hated enough, so, just bring me someone that'll actually appreciate me for a change. So thank you. God bless you.